Hey there, welcome to the Animal Intuitive channel. Tonight we have a very special show because we're here to honor canine veterans with our guest, Mike Ritland, former Navy SEAL and founder of the Warrior Dog Foundation. The Warrior Dog Foundation is a not-for-profit 501c3 organization that transitions our country's working canines from an operational environment into retirement. The Warrior Dog Foundation provides mental and physical rehabilitation and rehoming options to military working dogs, contract working dogs, and law enforcement canines that otherwise would be euthanized. So Mike is also the owner of, actually, is it Trikos or Trikos?
Trikos.
Trikos International, which trains dogs for service assignments globally. He is a renowned celebrity protection dog trainer. He's also the author of several books, including Trident K9 Warriors, Navy SEAL Dogs, and Team Dog. And also, he has a very popular YouTube channel and podcast. And he has appeared on ABC, CBS, 60 Minutes, and many more shows. So we're going to be discussing everything tonight from the unbreakable bond between heroic dogs and their handlers to the heartwarming mission of the Warrior Dog Foundation and the rehabilitation and adoption process for brave canine veterans. If you're new here, I'm Ann. Here we give animals a voice through animal communication, natural pet care, and we have interviews with experts in the field of animal care and advocacy. And we also support pet parents. So before we get into our show topics, I want to just take a moment to introduce Mike Ritland to the show. Thank you so much for being here, Mike.
Thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here, and the day after Canine Veterans Day is a special time for all of us in the canine industry. So it's great to be on, and I appreciate you having me.
Thank you, and thank you also for your service. We greatly appreciate your service, and we're honored to have you here. And yes, so as Mike mentioned, today is the day after Canine Veterans Day, but it's Furry Furs Days, so we're having our Furry Furs Day show here. So I want to welcome anybody who's here in the chat or just watching and let you know that you can feel free to post your questions in the comments in the chat. And we have a lot to talk about. So let's start, Mike, with you just telling us a little bit about how you came to be a canine military dog trainer.
Sure. So when I was on deployment, it was my second deployment at SEAL Team 3. It was right at the start of the Iraq War. And I guess taking a couple steps back, I mean, I grew up with dogs, with bird dogs in northern Iowa, and I had several friends that went out hunting, duck hunting with their dads, and ran a bunch of labs or bird dogs, and it just always fascinated me. So I was always into it and interested in the training aspect and the genetic makeup that allowed these dogs to do what they did out in the brush. And we had a black lab growing up that I bonded with and was a really integral part of my childhood and just a very special dog for me at that time in my life. And then in the military, seeing military working dogs do what they do, which, not taking away anything from hunting dogs, because they're spectacular in their own right, but to see, our ability to work with these, pointy-eared herder dogs at the level that guys were working with them just fascinated me, and I was just blown away by it. And so on that deployment, witnessing dogs doing their thing and saving our soldiers' lives was really the light switch moment for me to want to get involved. And so I came back from that deployment and remained in the SEAL teams for another 5-6 years. And during that time, really just kind of did everything I could to learn more about the training aspect. I already had a pretty good knowledge base for breeding, genetic theory, veterinary medicine, and some dog training, but it was generic compared to the specialties that take place in the military and police canine working world. So I just started to really dive headfirst into that specialization. And then as I was getting out, I spent the last couple of years as an instructor. And at that time, the West Coast Multi-Purpose Canine Program, which is the SEAL Canine Program, was getting into full swing, and I did a little bit of work with them. Was offered a position as a handler there, but for me, two things. One, I'd lost 40% of my lung capacity from a lung disease that I'd contracted in the desert a few years prior, and I had already kind of planned on getting out and starting my own dog company and going the training route. So it was a tough decision, but I ultimately ended up just exiting the Navy, starting my own company, and then coming back a few years later after I had done some other government canine work with some explosive detection dogs for TSA and vapor. Sorry, I misspoke there. The TSA and DHS, some canine programs there, and then came back as the trainer for the multi-purpose canine program.
And then how did get started with the Warrior Dog Foundation? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the Warrior Dog Foundation was really born out of necessity. I had been, doing the dog company thing for a few years, and myself and several other gentlemen in the same position that I was in were approached by a special operations unit that had two dogs that both had been injured in combat, had done multiple deployments, and they were being retired, and they didn't have anywhere for them, basically. So they asked me and several other guys, and we all said no. We said, I don't have any place to put these dogs. I just started the business. I was struggling to kind of make ends meet on my own. My kennel was full of prospects and puppies and business dogs, as it were. And so we all said no. And so about a month went by, and they came back and asked again, which told me, okay, well, everybody else said no if they're asking again. So I asked them, if none of us take these two dogs, what's going to happen to them? And they said, well, unfortunately, we'll probably just put them down because we don't have the resources to keep them. Keeping them and giving them what they need is going to take away from the active dogs and the handlers and the warfighter, and it's going to decrease their capability, which is just kind of a lose-lose tough spot to be in. I can't blame them for being in that position. I don't think it's their fault. I think it's above them. It's our government not taking care of dogs and having programs or at least grants set aside for organizations like ours to be able to have the funds needed to take care of all of working dogs, and that never being an issue. But there was nothing at that time set up, and so I just said, well, I've heard enough. I'll take them. I'll figure it out. To me, those dogs getting put down was just unacceptable. So I took them, and that was in August of 2010, and kind of the rest is history. I mean, that essentially opened the floodgates as it relates to different military working units and then police canines. Word kind of traveled fast, and I do want to kind of make the distinction. These are special circumstance dogs. Most dogs, and this is police, military, you name it, Department of Defense, whatever working capacity they're in, Customs, Border Patrol. In most cases, the dogs are able to be adopted to their handlers, but in some cases, and I would say it's a percentage point, if that, the dogs are just such liabilities from a temperament, and whether it's PTSD or just kind of the emotional circumstances that they've been through that have contributed to their lack of amicability when it comes to integrating into a normal house environment just isn't there. And so when they check all of those boxes and kind of fit into that category, then that's where we step in and take them to prevent them from being euthanized. And it is tricky because these dogs are dogs that have bit a lot of people, most of whom were supposed to be bit, but in the cases where we take them, it's always they've bit people that they weren't supposed to bite, and so that comes with a lot of liability. It comes with having to have very experienced, competent, specialized training staff members at our kennel facility that are there 24/7, and being able to man a 30 kennel facility 24/7 with competent, experienced people is a heavy lift. So it's it's a revolving door of liability and just difficult processes when it comes to intaking dogs and rehabilitating them and keeping the staff members and the dogs safe. So that's why we exist.
Thank you. And just so everyone can see, this is the website that's supposed to be there. There we go. You're supposed to be there too, but you're not. In the little picture here, but this is the website. We were talking about the Warrior Dog Foundation. If you want to check that out after the show, please head on over there. There's the website link, and it's also in the description. And imagine we'll talk a little bit more about that too. But you can obviously do some good things there. You can donate, and also there's adoption form there for anybody who might be interested. So maybe tell us a little bit about I had questions. You kind of thank you so much, because you're actually going into some things that I wanted to ask you about. I was surprised when I went to do some research before we met about what's available for these dogs from our government, from the military, after they've been in service. And I was having a hard time finding anything. It was basically what I found not looking good. So I was just wondering if you could tell me a little about that. What's going on?
Well, yeah.
there?
So again, that's why we exist, and there's a number of other organizations that have similar mission sets. And we all work together and have worked together in the past, where have been able to take some dogs from different organizations to help the burden on them. But it's really unfortunate. I mean, that's the bottom line, is that there are a lot of dogs. I mean, the rough estimate is about 50,000 working canines in the United States. Now, keep in mind that's all of Department of Defense, other government agencies, Customs Border Patrol, Coast Guard, Secret Service, Federal Protection Services. So that there are a lot of different entities that use canines, but that's a lot of dogs. The single biggest entity, or two entities, are Customs Border Patrol and Department of Defense. So those are the two biggest entities that run the most dogs, neither of which have a retirement program or any type of funding, facilities, staff members, training, transition process. There's absolutely nothing. Even as we're sitting here talking today, we continue to take dogs from both of those entities on a regular basis. And it is really unfortunate that our government, can't get their act together with all of the other things that the United States spends money on. To me, that this should be a no-brainer, and we shouldn't even be having this conversation. Not that I don't want our organizations to exist, but to me, that the fact that we even need to exist, I think speaks volumes to the lack of accommodations that have not been set aside by the United States government to take care of these dogs. And just like with human beings, our VA is kind of a mess. It at least exists. There's no VA for dogs whatsoever, and they run into the same problems. They get to a certain age where they can't continue to do the job, but it's well before when they naturally pass from natural causes. So that's kind of the big question. What do you do with them? Again, most people just take the dog, and even then, they're not getting any funding for that. Overwhelmingly, the handlers that take dogs and retire their own dogs, it's a privilege. They are getting an expensive, well-bred, well-trained dog, and they get to keep them, and that's a cool deal. But it's also expensive. They generally have higher than what I would say normal pet requirements in terms of vet care and nutrition and rehabilitation and things that they need to work through as they retire. And the United States government on the federal, state, and local levels provide no assistance that I'm aware of. Now, there may be a one-off department or entity here or there that helps their guys out. I'm not aware of any. If they exist, it's unknown to me. But so all of that considered, it's a lot of kind of breaking brush, for all of our organizations to go out there and secure funding year after year, and it's a constant battle. And so we've all been to Capitol Hill, and every organization has had some representation in Washington, D.C. at some point in the last 15 years trying to secure funding or, shake enough branches to get politicians to get something set aside. And there has been some traction, but none permanent yet that has actually contributed or manifested into actual dollars being set aside and distributed to any of our organizations.
Gosh, it's kind of shocking, honestly. I mean, these dogs serve, and the handlers too. They have to take their. I mean, I'm sure they want to, of course, take them home with
Yeah.
them. But I mean, there should be some benefits for them. That's it's just unbelievable.
Yeah.
So, well, I mean, and actually, I was looking at some statistics. I was actually trying to find, maybe you know this or have an idea. I ended up having to use AI because I couldn't find this information about how the number of military working dogs that are injured or unfortunately killed in duty. I ended up with AI telling me that there was on average 29 injured dogs reported, where 11 survived and 18 died. I believe this was on average, meaning like, I don't know if that meant a year now that I'm looking at it. The Officer Down website, which I guess is for police dogs, said 25 in 2023 alone. So that was
Yeah.
killed in the
Yeah,
line of duty.
yeah. I mean, obviously on the military side, it varies pretty drastically depending on what involvement
Right.
the United States has in different areas of operation. But on the police canine side, it's pretty consistent where there's dozens per year, that are killed in the line of duty, and even more than that injured. Whether it's during actual deployment, of searching for somebody and they get, either stabbed or shot, or it's not uncommon for somebody to be up in a tree or, in an attic or, down a sewer or something where the dog may fall from a high distance going after somebody, or, a lot of dynamic things are taking place when dogs are being deployed trying to capture suspects in the police realm. So yeah, I mean, again, just like with the human beings, it's very dangerous. And if you were to put kind of a percentage on it, I would say the canines are actually in even more danger than humans, because they're generally, if something's really dangerous, us as human beings will send the dog in first.
Yeah.
So they're kind of the tip of the spear, especially police canines, but even, again, the special operations, specifically on the military side, same thing. It's like, if we're under the assumption that, a building or a room is laden with explosives, we'll send the dog to check it out first. And so that's obviously a pretty dangerous position to put them in. But yeah, it's a rough operational tempo. It's hard on them, both physically and mentally, and they put in a lot of work and save a lot of lives.
Yeah, and I was thinking, well, I went down a rabbit hole getting ready for this show, and I ended up watching this documentary on the History Channel, and it was about Benno. Well, Benno was in it, and I guess you've had Benno's handler on your show too.
Yeah.
But it was, oh my gosh, I just, I don't know how they do it. I don't know how they handle it. Now, okay, I understand they're trained soldiers and you're in a different mindset in that situation, but I couldn't believe how he had to go on. I'm sorry, I had his name here. We kind of been jumping around, so yeah.
Julian McDonald is his name.
Trent.
Yep.
Oh,
Yeah.
Trent McDonald,
Yeah.
or yeah.
Yeah, he goes by both. So
Oh, okay.
he probably has a preference. Maybe I should know it, but Trent or Julian McDonald. But yeah,
Oh,
he's
okay.
a great guy. I had him on the show. I encourage anybody. I've had a number of handlers on. I had Will Chesney, who was the handler on the Bin Laden raid. He was on my show as well.
Yeah.
Both of those
Cairo.
episodes are great. I think examples of visually and visibly being able to see that bond, just in how they talk about their experiences with their dog, and what it was like to go through training and deployments with them, and it's just, it's such a magical interaction between man and beast when you see those animals working with human beings and what they have to go through. But to your kind of question and point, the harsh reality of combat, and I would say, police canines, when they're being utilized, on the streets of America, it's a pretty similar environment. While there may not be IEDs and belt-fed automatic machine guns and booby traps and things of that nature, it's really no less dangerous, percentage-wise, or if you look at the likelihood of police officers being injured or the dogs being injured, it's pretty comparable from my perspective. And so, when you're in that environment, there really isn't a choice. Any type of emotional taking of a knee and being in a position where you're negatively impacted or affected by losing a dog, it's no different than with the human being. Like, you still have to continue to do the mission and drive on, and that's just unfortunately part of it. And I think that police officers and service members are, by default and necessity, are masters at compartmentalizing emotion and being able to suppress certain feelings and experiences, and pushing them down and dealing with them in many instances years later, which is not healthy, but it's necessary. Again, if you're faced with a choice where you can be negatively impacted and end up dying, or somebody else gets killed because you were a mess because of what just happened, that's a pretty negative or not desirable alternative. So,
right.
Yeah, you just have to keep going. But
yeah, I was sitting there. My husband was sort of half watching. He was doing some work, and he like heard it, and out of the corner he saw what was coming. He's like, "Close your eyes, close your eyes," and I didn't, and I'm crying. It was just, I don't know. Oh my gosh. And then he had to move on, and so we have to. It must be extremely difficult. But I noticed in that documentary too, even the other guys in his is it called platoon? Is it called? I'm sorry. His troop, his unit. Oh, sorry.
On the branch, but
okay. And it was affected them too. Having to.
Absolutely, yeah. The guys bond with the dog the same way. The dog ends up being one of the guys, just like anybody else, and when we lose dogs, they have memorials done for them the same way that human beings do. They're memorialized on the unit compounds, whether it's a quarterdeck or wherever they have the names of fallen human beings. They're right there in there with them. So they're absolutely part of the team the same way humans are.
No, well, that's wonderful. And I'm curious, I know I'm kind of backing up a little bit, but how did these dogs start? How have they evolved since they started being utilized, or whatever you want to use the word for, in the military?
Sure. So, what's interesting to me, at least, is the kind of the consistency with which canines have been used on the battlefield for millennia. If you look back to the earliest recorded, kind of data recollections of combat, canines were used all the way back in the Spartan era, a little bit differently, but not all that differently. Obviously, they weren't searching for explosives, but they were used to find enemy combatants and subdue them, and and as a force protection multiplier, and have been ever since. Now, obviously, with technology being what it is, we've been able to implement and complement the canines with night vision cameras strapped to them, or other things of that nature that just help us increase their capability even further. But they're they're really the one thing. If you think back to the Roman Empire, or the Spartan 300 era, and all the way up till now, even with all of the AI guided drones and smart bombs and laser guided munitions and things of that nature, even with all of that on the battlefield, we still use canines with our absolute most elite tier one operators, and they're uh, and they're that's right, and they're those dogs are going out in front of our
I'm listening.
nation's
I'm going to
finest.
stop that. Keep talking.
Sure.
Keep
Yeah.
going.
Well, so to me that's a pretty amazing fact, or aspect to the utilization of working dogs, is that even with as advanced of a society as we've become, warfare wise, we still use dogs out in front of our very best soldiers to protect them and find explosives or people that we can't manage to find ourselves. So
Yeah, it's amazing that there is all that technology and they are still, it just goes to show how incredible they are.
yeah.
So, I'm wondering, do you know how Canine Veterans Day came to be? Was that
I
something that
don't.
was.
I embarrassingly probably should know when its inception was. I don't, but I am glad that it exists, and to me, that's one thing that we've gotten right, as a society, is setting aside a day to recognize them. I wish it was a little more mainstream. I wish mainstream media would
Yeah.
spend more time on it. And we did have our founder and one of our ambassadors, who was a SEAL canine handler, on a Dallas morning show program yesterday, which was
Okay.
cool. And there are some outlets that recognize and will do a piece on it, but I would love to see the big stations recognize that the same way they do Veterans Day or Memorial Day, or any of the other holidays. But hopefully we'll get there.
Right. Yeah, you see a little bit, but it's not as widespread as it certainly should be.
Yeah,
But nice, nice that we have it, considering what we were talking about before with how little they get
yeah.
after they're discharged. So, I was curious: there's no Canine Memorial Day? So do we sort of celebrate the two together? Well, celebrate isn't exactly the word, but do we honor them at the same
Yeah, I mean,
time, you think?
as, as,
Or
as far as I'm concerned, yes. So yeah, I mean, I feel like it's kind of all lumped together, which is fine. Like I said, I mean, to me, step one is having Canine Veterans Day maybe a little more mainstream and recognized a little more prominently than it is. But like I said, one day at a time with that. But,
yeah, and I do want to go back and ask you some questions and a little bit more about the dogs that you work with the Warrior Dog Foundation.
yeah.
But I was curious too, just to kind of like give a little bit of a foundation. How are these dogs trained? Like what goes on, and from the start, like does the military have their own breeding program for the dogs?
They do, but it's, I would say, a small portion of where the dogs come from. Most of them come from Europe. And if you look at kind of the historical aspect of where pointy-eared dogs, were first used for this type of application, it started back in Belgium, the Netherlands, area, where they used them for police work. And so that was well over 100 years ago. And now, here we are generations later, using them in a host of different capacities. But so from a military and police standpoint, generally they're imported. Not always. I mean, there are some purveyors here in the United States that either breed them, or they import them and sell them to the government. The military down at Lackland Air Force Base, at least had a program. I'm actually not sure if it's still going in full swing or not. I don't believe that they had significant success with it. percentage wise, but the tough part is being able to breed, raise, and train dogs is a very, very specialized skill set, and it's something that, at least from my perspective, you have to have years and years of experience doing it, and you have to know people that have been doing it for generations, and understand bloodlines and genetic theory, and Wright's inbreeding coefficient, and understanding the genetic aspect of how to funnel genetic theory and code into these dogs to get a litter of puppies that, from a percentage standpoint, has a high likelihood of success. And that's a very difficult thing to do, even when you're breeding really, really good dogs. That's only the first part of it. The second part of it is how you actually raise them really from day one. These dogs, and again, bringing up kind of the Spartan parallel, is that they're kind of brought up in that same manner, where they start training pretty much immediately. Even in the first few weeks of their life, while they're still being weaned, you start doing certain biosensor stress training, and tactile feedback, and starting to use their nose and make auditory associations with certain noises that you want them to be comfortable with, and pairing that with feeding on their mom, and then ultimately, starting to do rag tug work with them to start into bite work as early as 6 or 7 weeks old, and it never stops. So and then you're taking them all over different environmentally challenging areas, whether it's playgrounds, Home Depot type of environments, where it's just a lot of stimuli taking place that can be challenging for a lot of dogs, and getting them exposed to all of those things at a really early age, so that they're unaffected by it, and it just continues from there. So it's a very difficult process to be able to breed high level working dogs at a high percentage, and that's why even now we still import a lot of them.
Okay. And now, are they now really just using Malinois or Belgian Malinois?
Yeah, I would say predominantly, but there's still a number of German Shepherds utilized as well, or Dutch Shepherds. And even when it comes to strictly detection work, so if you remove the patrol or bite side, it's not uncommon for there to be pointers, or retrievers, or Labradors, or even some smaller dogs, some of the terriers, and kind of ratting or vermin hunting dogs are utilized in many cases for detection work, whether it's narcotics, explosives, whatever, because you can take little Patterdales or Jack Russells, or little dogs like that, and they can sweep through a semi-trailer a lot easier than a 90-pound German Shepherd can. So when it comes to strictly detection, I would say, as long as the dog has good environmental nerve and really high prey and hunt drive, you can use just about any dog to do scent work. But when it comes to the patrol side, it's pretty rare to find dogs outside of German Shepherds, Belgian Malinois, and Dutch Shepherds that have all of the tools to do both of those things.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And how long does it usually take to get them ready once a handler has, I guess, been matched?
Yeah, so it varies pretty significantly on what, in essence, what the statement of work is. So what are we going to be doing with the dog? Is it is it a military special operations guy? Is it a military MP that's doing sentry work, or the dog's sitting at a checkpoint or something like that? So all of those factors are going to dictate how long it takes. And even then, let's say on the special operations side, which I would say is probably the longest process training wise, even that can vary, because sometimes we'll get dogs in that are a little younger. Sometimes we'll get dogs that are a little older. Depends on what experience they already have, what training they already have. But while I was there as a trainer, I would say on average it was about 18 months from the time we got the dog in-house and he had passed all of the selection criteria. From that day until the dog was ready to deploy, it was generally about 18 months. But again, it can vary plus or minus depending on all those factors.
Okay, so quite a bit of time goes into getting him ready.
Yes.
Um, and is the handler with that dog? Is that primarily just what they're doing that whole time? Is
It is. It'll be generally in conjunction with a trainer or several trainers, where there's kind of a roadmap of or like a checklist of, okay, we need the dog to be able to do this, and this, and so they're kind of going through, laying the foundation, putting the dog through its paces, and doing all of the different training modalities that the dog needs to be able to do to satisfy the pre-deployment criteria to ensure that that dog is certified from an in-house standpoint and ready to deploy. So yeah, the handler's going to play an integral role and going to be handling the dog, but there's going to be trainers that are kind of leading the charge on that. In some cases, the trainers may get the dog first and put some foundation on. If it's a younger dog or a very inexperienced dog, they may spend a period of several months putting some basic foundational stuff into the dog before the handler even becomes part of the equation. There's kind of I would say, a bare minimum that needs to be there before you bring the handler in and start doing the handler work. They've got to have some basic obedience. I would say it's good to have, whatever, if they're a detector dog, whether it's explosives, narcotics, what have you, is that they've had those odors imprinted, and they've started that training, and so that when the handler comes in, he can kind of weave himself into that training pipeline during it, and be part of it from then on.
okay. And what would you say the ideal kind of qualities are for a detection dog?
For a detection dog, it's super environmentally sound. So the dog can go anywhere, can hear anything, is completely unaffected by loud noises, slippery floors, dark rooms, open stairwells. Things that are generally pretty challenging to a lot of dogs.
Yeah.
The dog just doesn't care about them. So really strong environmental nerves, and then really high prey drive and really high hunt drive, because that's what you're using to train the dog to find whatever that target odor is. Again, it goes beyond explosive and narcotics. I mean, there's bed bugs, human remains, cell phones. There's a lot of different odors that you can train a dog to detect. And that's primarily what it is. Now, when you incorporate the patrol or bite side, you have to have all of those things that we talked about first for a detector dog, and then you need a dog that has natural forward aggression, and a dog that has a certain caliber of intestinal fortitude and backbone, that will be able to engage with a human being that's 4, 5, 6 times that dog size, who's not scared of them and intent on hurting them. And when the dog has to run into somebody like that as a worst case scenario, you need a pretty special dog to deal with somebody like that. And so it takes a lot of evaluation and putting the dog through the paces from a selection process standpoint to identify the dog that has all of those tools.
And who gets to be a handler in the military? I'm assuming it's a job. I don't know. I'm assuming it's a job a lot of people want, but maybe not. I don't.
Yeah, I mean, yes and no. I mean, there's generally no shortage of volunteers, but it's also not for everybody. No pun intended, but it is a completely different animal. And unlike, say, if you're in special operations, bringing a new weapon system online, or a new technology that we're going to implement, that's a lot easier to onboard something like that than to now all of a sudden learn how to handle a dog that's a living, breathing creature that requires you to understand, psychology and how dogs learn, how they think, how to use reinforcement schedules to train a dog. Those are completely outside the realm of what normal day-to-day activities and training modalities that soldiers need to understand and ultimately master. So I think the tricky part about being a handler for both police and military is that the job itself is tough as it is, and now when you throw being a dog handler into the mix, you have to still be able to do do both. The handler has to still be a soldier, but he also has to handle a dog, and there's a lot of extra considerations and things taking place that you have to be mindful of when you're trying to do both at the same time. To your question, it depends, and I hate to answer most questions that way, but it does really depend. Some units struggle with finding handlers and have to just basically you're voluntold to do it. Other units have a long list of people that want to be handlers, and it's a very competitive billet or spot. And everything in between, so it's going to vary pretty significantly depending on the unit, how busy they are, what they're doing, what their priorities are operationally, etc.
And do you find there's any difference, female dogs, male dogs? Does it matter? What?
No, I mean, so if in terms of once the dog has made it through the selection process, no, there's absolutely no difference, at least from my experience and perspective. And for that matter, breed is irrelevant. A dog that, at least if I put a dog through my test, my evaluation process, and that dog passes, then it's basically all the same dog. And sex and breed is essentially a paint job. I mean, there's really no difference. Dog to dog, male, female, Dutch Shepherd, German Shepherd, what have you. There's plenty of folks out there in the industry that would probably scoff at what I just said or would argue with me about that. That's my opinion. That's my experience, is that if your criteria and your selection is thorough and as tough and stringent as it should be, then none of those things are going to play any role. No different than hiring somebody would. Race and sex shouldn't play a role in your selection process. At least from my standpoint, it shouldn't. It should be completely based on the working traits of the dog and can they do the work. If they can, then they're good to go. If not, then they're not. And those things don't really enter into the equation for me.
And what's their life like when they're not out, like on a mission? They're just dogs, like just playing and hanging out with everyone and eating their food?
I would say sometimes, but generally they're in either a kennel environment at the unit, or they're in a kennel environment, with their handler. Now, I will say, generally, this is where the military and police, you're going to see more of a contrast between those two. Most times, militarily, the dogs are, they're government property. Not that they're not in the police force, but they're in a big kennel environment that's on base, and the dogs are kept in a big environment like that, where there's kennel techs, there's trainers that kind of rotate and do kennel duties and have a watch bill, if you will, that they take care of those things and they rotate through and what have you. Even with the unit that I was with, there were periods where handlers were allowed to take their dogs home, and there were periods where they weren't. And usually when they're allowed to do it and then all of a sudden they can't, something bad happened, a handler had an accident or a problem with a neighbor or something like that, and whoever was in charge said, okay, one guy ruined it for everybody, they're all going back to base. It's not ideal. I mean, it's for sure better to have the dog with the handler as much as possible, because that's what they understand. Time and engagement is a dog's currency. On the police side, I would say most of the time that dog goes home with the handler. Depending on how the dog is, caliber-wise, how experienced the handler is generally going to dictate how integrated that dog is in with that handler's family. In some cases, it's a lot like a house dog. And in the other cases, the handler may have a concrete slab poured in an outdoor kennel run where the dog is kept when he's not on duty, and it's going to depend on what the dynamic of the situation is. But that's generally one of those two options.
And do you have a memorable experience working with the canines when you were active in the military? You were training them. You weren't a handler, right? You were
Correct.
Training them.
Correct. I mean, yeah. To me, it's to be able to get out of of the military. I spent 12 years in the SEAL teams, and then, to get out, start my own company, and get the training contract for the same coast of SEALs that I was working with was, professionally probably the highlight of my career. To be able to fuse both of those things together and get to do that for a living was an absolute honor, and one that I'll take to my grave, cherishing it. It was just spectacular to be able to be a part of that, and something I'll always look fondly on. I will say, professionally, there's also never been a time where I felt the weight of the responsibility and the gravity of what I was doing as high as when I was there, because a lot of the guys that I worked with that were active duty handlers were guys that I knew really well, some that I was either an instructor with or went to war with, essentially. And so, to be responsible for selecting those dogs, training those dogs, handing, guys that I knew and considered, brothers in arms of mine, handing them the leash and saying, okay, go overseas and put your life on this dog's shoulders is a pretty heavy burden to bear from a responsibility standpoint, but one that I was very honored to be able to have.
And how do you see the future of Canine Warriors in military operations evolving? What advancements do you anticipate in there? Do you think it's going to kind of stay the same, or do you see them being used in other ways or changes?
I see them being used generally the same that they have been for hundreds or thousands of years. In a general sense, what I will say is that as technology or technological capabilities increase for us, finding a way to weave or implement those into the dog's capability, I think we'll just parallel it. But yeah, it's kind of if it's not broke, don't fix it mentality, where they're very good. Back at the height of the Iraq War, the 06-07 time frame, when IEDs were the single biggest lethality that was killing our service members in Iraq, the U.S. government did a several billion-dollar study trying to identify the most effective way to combat improvised explosive devices. And after, I think it was 18 months or 2 years and a couple $1 billion, they determined that the dog's nose was the single best and most effective means of detecting explosives and identifying them to keep our troops safe. And even as expensive as they are, when we buy them for what we do and the amount of time, money, and manpower and resources that go into getting them to that level, it's still a fraction of what some of these machines cost that they tried to implement that just at the end of the day weren't as good as a dog's nose, which is pretty remarkable.
Yeah, I was listening, I was audiobooking Team Dog, your book here, and it was really reminding me, I work with animals, but just reminding me how incredible their sense of smell is. If you have a chance, get this book, people, because it's really helpful. It has me back to clicker training, my German Shepherd. And also, people who are watching this might be interested in a few of your books, but this Navy SEAL dogs is especially related.
Yeah.
So, okay, so I'm also just curious. I want to talk to you more about the Warrior Dog Foundation, but I just want to ask, this kind of relates, but the dogs that you said almost all, they do tend to go home with the families, like the military dogs. They do, but what if the person's still active duty? They have to go home and hope that someone in the family is going to take them. That's right. That's kind of the...
No, I would say a more common scenario is, let's say a dog is getting ready to be retired and the handler is halfway through their enlistment term for that duty station, and they're going to get another dog and deploy again. Then usually somebody else in the unit will take them, or maybe a handler that's familiar with the dog that's now gone. That's usually the first choice. It's, I would say, generally not a great idea to have the dog at home with family most of the time. There are instances where the dog is temperamentally appropriately matched and can do that, but but more often than not, it's somebody else in the unit, or somebody that can handle the dog, that has the appropriate resources and experience to be able to. But
Okay. And then do they get them back, or they just end up kind of living out their life with that person
sometimes, we
usually?
here at the Warrior Dog Foundation, we've had a couple instances of, and one in particular that has gone full circle. This was a dog that myself and Wayne, the other trainer that was out there when I was there, we brought this dog in named Nico from Europe, and put him through his first training cycle, and then paired him up with a handler. He did multiple deployments with two different handlers. The last handler that had him, once the dog was retired, he came to the Warrior Dog Foundation. Well, that last handler still had several years left, and went and deployed again. And so we hung on to him for several years. And then Taylor Canfield is his name, got out of the military, came to our ranch facility and readopted Nico out, and now still has him. In fact, I just saw him last week. He came out to the kennel facility, and we took some pictures and video. And Nico, white muzzled and kind of hobbling around, but still kicking. So it was really neat to kind of have that full circle experience with him. And we've done that for some other handlers. There's even been a few cases where they adopted the dog, but now have to deploy, and so we'll hang on to the dog for that 6 or 8 month period while they're deployed, and then they come back and then get the dog again. And so, the individual circumstance is going to usually dictate who gets them and kind of how that whole process works. But that's why we exist, is to be able to help everybody out in those cases.
Do you think these dogs are kind of, I don't know, they kind of, they get it and they're a little different? Like, do they handle that separation better than maybe some dogs would?
Generally, yes. I will say, I've come across some dogs that did have some separation anxiety, but for the most part, one of the things that I find from a genetic trait standpoint is, typically when a dog is really confident and supremely environmentally stable, that those two things aren't usually associated with a dog that also has separation anxiety, because they're confident and stable in every environment. So having said that, some dogs, after they've been through years of combat and some pretty harrowing experiences, can develop some of those separation issues, and those need to be worked through. But overall, I would say that it's usually not a problem.
It kind of leads to my next question. What kind of things are you seeing with these dogs? Are you getting a lot of dogs that have PTSD? Is it more physical issues? What?
Yeah, so the manifestation of symptoms that human beings experience is very similar. The one huge contrast between canines and their psychology, i.e. how their brain works, versus human beings, is that they're making an association with something. It's generally a stimuli. It could be gunfire, it could be helicopter noises, it could be the smell of gunpowder. I mean, whatever the stimuli was that took place that created issues with them is going to be, if you think about it from an A plus B equals C association, that's how their mind is rationalizing it, if you will. Whereas human beings are going to obviously think way further down a rabbit hole of what they experienced, why it happened. They're going to empathize maybe with what they saw, or it's going to cause traumatic issues that way that are a lot more complicated to unpack and unwind and process. If you think about a dog in terms of the way that their mind works, they don't think in a language. If you just try to grasp that, we have an internal monologue. We dream in a language. When we see something we don't understand, we're thinking through it in this internal monologue. But it's a language inside of our head. It's hard to even imagine what it would be like to not have that. So dogs are much more simplistic that way, in that it's A plus B equals C. It's a simple association with everything that they encounter. So The good news with that is that the way that you kind of process them through that or unwind that in their mind is think of it like a piggy bank. And you've got all these negative coins with this association to whatever the stimuli is that's causing problems. Similar to, say, a computer hard drive, is that you're going to override or overwrite that those negative associations. You're going to put a bunch of positive coins in with that same association. So an example would be, let's say it's gunfire. And let's say gunfire triggers a dog to be, reactively aggressive, or they shut down and tremor and become an emotional problem. So in this case, you're going to take that same sound, but you're going to dial the volume down to where they can just barely hear it, and you're going to pair it with feeding the dog, clicking and treating the dog, or playing tug with the dog, things that are going to relieve stress in the dog, an activity that's going to relieve stress, and you're going to pair that stimuli, and you're going to slowly increase the volume to where you're overriding that negative association with it over time, and that's generally how you're going to get dogs through whatever PTS issues they have with their associations.
Okay, awesome. And what are the major health issues that you're having to work through to rehabilitate? What do you have to do?
It's generally joint or mobility related. I mean, that's really the only significant problems that we see. You may, just like with a lot of dogs and humans for that matter, as they age, can get cancer or tumors or neurological issues, et cetera. But overwhelmingly, our biggest challenge physically or medically, outside of anything going on inside their head, is mobility, joint overuse injuries, things of that nature, or even soft tissue injuries as they get older. Their body is older, but their mind still makes them think that they're 2.5, and so they'll chase a ball or try to be as active. Kind of like me if I haven't been working out for a while and I go in the gym and I'm going to throw the same weight I had on when I was 25, and I can do that, and you end up, ripping your shoulder or what have you. They do the same dumb things that we do as humans, and get a little overzealous physically, but that's usually it. I mean, the dogs that have all the tools to do this type of work are generally pretty hardy and from a hereditary standpoint, pretty immaculate.
Mm-hmm. Okay. How much time do you find it takes before the ones that are going to get adopted out end up being adopted out?
I would say on average it's 3 to 4 months. But I will say that we usually have a really good idea as to whether or not they're going to be able to be adopted out pretty quick. It's just one of those things. After having done it for a long time, you get a pretty good feel for it. Same way, an employer that's been in business a long time knows, early on in an interview, is this person going to work or not? You get kind of that same vibe or feeling in the dog. Sometimes you're surprised either way, but I'd say 4 to 6 months on average, if the dog has some issues that we need to work through, is about how long it will typically take to get through them before we say, okay, now I think this dog is at a place where they can be adopted out. Now, having said that, finding an ideal or appropriate candidate is a challenge, because, again, with the backdrop of understanding that these dogs have all been, in positions or situations where they've bit people that they weren't supposed to multiple times. For us as an organization to do our due diligence and be mindful of the liability and putting the dog in a position where the dog is not safe, and or the individual or individuals that are adopting the dog are not safe, we've got to treat that with the utmost priority in terms of not putting either in a precarious situation. So we require that there's no other pets, that there are no small children in the house, that you own your own property, that there's no elderly people in the house that wouldn't be able to physically manage the dog as well. And then also a certain size property with privacy fence, at least one area that's completely enclosed with privacy fence, so that there's no issues with neighbor animals, etc. And so that's kind of step one. And then step two is that there has to be an understanding and a knowledge base, that can handle these dogs appropriately, that has to be there, or it's just not going to work, because the last thing we want is for the individuals adopting or the dogs to be injured, because there are certain things or intangibles that should be in place that aren't.
Okay, so you want somebody, this is not their first dog, I take it, not their first,
Absolutely. Somebody needs to be, I would say there's two sides to that coin. The environment needs to be appropriate, and the knowledge base, experience, and competency of the individual adopting the dog needs to be appropriate, because, these dogs are all dangerous. That's the reality of it. I've been vet a number of times, one here just fairly recently by one of the retired dogs. And it does happen, fairly common. So, you have to understand that that's a very real possibility. Not only do you need to be able to deal with that, you need to know how to handle it if it does happen. And very few people that haven't had experience with these dogs are going to understand how to do that. So it's usually either former law enforcement, former military, or people that have been around, former veterinarians, things of that nature, people that have a pretty significant amount of experience with these animals.
got it. Well, that makes sense. And I also wanted to just back up. I wanted to ask you this and forgot. The animals what is the situation that you hear about every so often coming up about soldiers not being able to get their dog home? Like they're somehow being left. And they're not, it doesn't sound like they're working. They're being left overseas and they're putting out, go help me, you get these things in your email, like, signing a petition that this soldier can't get their dog home. Like what is going on there?
So there are different cases, obviously, that have drawn public attention to them. The kind of most notable ones where people like this huge group of dogs were left behind. It's generally misleading, and I would say that the couple of cases that I've seen, they weren't American government or military dogs. They were contractors. In some cases, they may have an American affiliation, but it's owned by somebody outside of the United States, and whatever host nation has contracted them to provide a number of working dogs for that capability, and there have been a couple instances where dogs were left behind or were mistreated, but initially people thought that they were U.S. military working dogs, and they weren't. There have been a number or a few cases, I would say, over the last we'll say 20 years, where handlers have, for some reason or another, been in a situation where the dog was not allowed to be retired to the handler. And I'm not going to say this is every case, but the cases that that have been brought to my attention and that people have asked me to get involved with, I want to say, and hopefully I'm not misspeaking here, but I want to say that in each instance it was a case where the dog was still young enough to have several years of operational capability left in them, and the handler was leaving the unit and wanted them, and the unit said, no, this dog is our asset, and we're going to still use him. He's going to be paired with another handler, and the handler was not happy about it. Maybe there are other instances where the handler was slighted more than that, or the unit said, no, it's too big of a liability, or we don't like you, and we're not going to give you the dog. I'm not saying those cases don't exist, but I will say that most often it's a case of the former, where the handler just wants the dog, which I get. If you've spent several years and deployed with a dog, and now you're leaving, you want it's your partner. You want him to come with you, and so in some of those cases, I have seen where there's been like GoFundMe's set up where people have raised money to say, hey, we'll buy the dog, we'll pay you, what you have into the dog to give it to the handler. And sometimes they've said yes, and sometimes they've said no, which that I don't really get. If the handler's willing to buy it, or people are willing to raise enough money, I don't really get it. But to be fair, I also understand, that the job of that department is to have dogs on the street, and if it creates a gap where now there's no dog in that place, now you are putting people at risk, and potentially making a problem worse out of selfishness, and then that's just the reality of it. So if there are cases where that the handler should get the dog's being retired and they're just being jerks about it, that I disagree with. I think the ideal scenario would be that when a dog is done, that it gets to go with a handler, and I think that's just best for everybody. So if there are cases, and I'm sure there probably have been, then that I do think is lame and should not be how it goes down. But
yeah, for sure. And I don't know if you want to get into this, but I was curious about it. What does it cost to rehabilitate one of these dogs, if you were to say put a dollar sign on it?
Yeah, I mean, it's really impossible to put a dollar sign on a dog, because it can be thousands of dollars a month, or a fraction of that. Some dogs require very specific nutrition, very specific medications. But then you also have, the facility, right? The facility has to be overbuilt. It's epoxy coated cinder block with rebar everywhere. There's, everything's reinforced. Everything is way overbuilt to be able to withstand the wear and tear that high energy, high drive working dogs, put on a facility. And then you have your staff, that there has to be somebody covering down 24/7. So, you can amortize, okay, if I look at the 30 dogs, what is it going to cost? It's expensive. The short answer is it's thousands and thousands of dollars a year per dog, to be able to take care of them, to have all of those things provided for 30 animals. It's not cheap, so it is a heavy lift, and ideally we'd love to be in a position where the U.S. government set aside at least basic operating costs that at least covers that, and anything beyond that is expansion or handler programs. One of the things we've done at the Warrior Dog Foundation that I'm really, really proud of, that our executive director, Laura Sellards, kind of created this program to help with the burden of having a full kennel facility of 30 animals and a waiting list of dogs that are slotted to come here, is the Hero at Home program, which is where we basically provide a state-of-the-art single-run outdoor kennel facility that we donate to the handlers, so that in an instance where the handler wants to take the dog but isn't set up for it, let's say he's traveling, or somebody else would need to be able to take care of the dog and can't, then we have this kennel facility that's built with all of these things in mind, that can withstand the wear and tear of a working dog, and that somebody, a family member or a trusted family friend, could take care of the dog without having to actually put their hands on the dog. And that takes a very special piece of equipment, with basically a guillotine door that separates the inside and outside, that you can use as a pulley system, where you can let the dog out. Kind of like a zoo, really, with big dangerous, tigers or gorillas or what have you. But that's the reality, is you have to, you have to have an accommodation set up, and that's how our kennel facility is. There's indoor, outdoor runs with guillotine pulley door systems that allow you to, if we get a dog in that, at first, if they're quarantined for either staff safety or illness, we can effectively and appropriately take care of the dog the way that they need to be taken care of, without having to actually put our hands on them for a period of time. That's a requirement. You have to have a facility that's built that way. So it's an important component. But my point to all of that was that, Laura came up with this idea to do this program, and it's just been a phenomenal ad. Our first ambassador, Chris Kappa, who who was the first recipient of this program. Him and his dog. He was a SEAL K9 handler. I had him on my show fairly recently.
Mm-hmm.
He got one of these kennel runs, and it's just been a smashing success of him being able to utilize that and bring his dog Mickey home and retire him the way that we all kind of want it to go. So really excited about that. But that's one of those things too, where we have our basic operating costs to take care of 30 dogs 24/7. But to be able to do things like that, we need funds and funding above and beyond what the basic operating costs are. And we'd also love to get to a point where we have enough in reserve to where we're not having to go out and beat the bush every year and raise the basic operating costs year after year after year. That's a pretty substantial resource grab that takes several people kind of raising money all the time to be able to accommodate. If we didn't have to worry about that, we could dedicate those individuals' resources to expanding the foundation and bringing in more dogs and things of that nature. So
Yeah, that's and by the way, once again, if you missed the beginning, you can always go to their website, thewarriordogfoundation.org, and keeps taking Mike off the view there, but when I go there, but you can donate there, you can shop there as well. They've got some neat stuff on there. I took a look at it. Oh, wait, we lost you, Mike. Wait a minute. I shouldn't have done that.
I can still hear you.
There you are. Okay, that was just my other view.
Yeah.
So make sure you do go to that website after this and check it out. And so that must have been incredible to be able to help him bring his dog home. And, that must have been incredibly satisfying. Are there any other stories of dogs that you've been able to adopt out that maybe you didn't think you were going to be able to? Or
yeah, I mean, there's been a few that, we've had other veterans that have a lot of experience, and their situation now enables us to be able to retire a dog that we kind of figured would probably be here for years. And there's been countless examples. But one thing I will say, that Hero at Home program, one of the huge benefits that I can see moving forward is us being able to adopt out a lot more dogs with that as a capability, not just to handlers, but to people who maybe are kind of on the bubble as far as their ability to take care of the dog from a competency standpoint. Having a facility resource at their house, is just going to increase the amount of dogs that we can adopt out, which is going to increase the amount of dogs that we can take in. Right now, we've got 12 dogs on a waiting list. We're at full capacity at 30, and there's a dozen dogs that are waiting to come here. So our goal as an organization is to never have to turn a dog down. So we've committed to taking these dogs just when we can. And the last thing we ever want is to be in a position where monetarily and facility wise, we have to say, no, we can't take the dog in, and that dog ends up being euthanized because we couldn't take them in. Not that we wouldn't, but that we couldn't. We never want to be in that position, so it's our goal to continue to grow, and we're looking to add a 12 kennel run annex to our existing facility later this year to help accommodate that waiting list and be able to bring in more dogs. But down the road, we've been in existence for 14 years this August. We would like to expand and have a facility on the East Coast, one on the West Coast, and then our main facility here in Texas to kind of cover the entire country. So long-term plans, that's what we would like to accomplish, but that's going to take, as you can imagine, considerable resources to be able to accommodate that.
Yeah, and that Hero at Home program, is that part of if people did go to that website and they wanted to donate, that would help? Okay.
Yep. Good. Yeah, it's all the same pot, if you will. So,
okay.
Yeah,
and
the more people donate, the higher likelihood that we're able to continue and be able to do that at a higher scale.
And I should have looked this up when I was researching this whole financial component and the government and all that, but you don't happen to know is there any particular program or foundation or anything like that that they're advocating for government to start taking better care of these dogs?
Not to my knowledge. I know there's been,
Yeah.
like I said, there's a couple other organizations similar to ours that, that have fought the good fight. Project Canine Hero and Mission K9 are two other great organizations that have fought at DC and trying to get funding for all of us. And so, to my knowledge, as of yet, we've not been able to get the U.S. government to set aside any grants or funding for us yet. But hopefully, sooner than later, they will. I would say, for those listening, if you can't donate, write your congressman, email or call, whoever your representative is, and that certainly can help too. So, there's multiple ways to attack this problem, and it's not just money, So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that really irks me. So I'm gonna do that myself because that's not right. So also just to mention, maybe say a little bit about your other work that you do. You do personal protection,
Yeah, I mean, I
dog
will say,
training,
like,
things like that.
yeah, I mean, I would really love to just keep it about the foundation and not promote anything I'm doing. I mean, if you want to check out what I'm doing, you can go on Ritland.com and find all of any of that out. But to me, the highlight is really the Warrior Dog Foundation, and that's the entity that needs everybody's help, and
Yeah.
I'm just honored to have been a part of it, and continue to do so. But,
It's incredible. It's wonderful. And I'm wondering, is there one thing you would like people to walk away from this understanding about our canine veterans?
just that they need your help. They don't have a voice, and it takes us as human beings to be the voice for them, and we have to fight for them because nobody else is. And so, I can't stress enough helping us or the other organizations like us, or trying to put enough pressure on our elected leaders to finally fix the problem that is, our canine veterans not having,
Yeah.
allocated resources for them. That's really the big takeaway is that the dogs need all of us to fight for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And is there anything else that I have missed that I could talk to you all night, but I'm wondering if there's anything that I didn't ask you that's important. And
No, I think you hit all the highlights, and I appreciate you doing so. And you're one of the advocates that can help us get to where all dogs are taken care of, and there's no waiting lists, and it's an ideal scenario for everybody. So I appreciate you giving us a voice and a platform, and having me on.
well, I'm honored to have you here, and I just appreciate it so much. And if there's anything I can ever do, please let me know. And yes, we thank you so much, Mike. We so appreciate your time and your service as well, and all the dogs. And I do have a very brief video that I made a few years ago that I just want to do as a closing. It's just sort of a honoring of these wonderful dogs. So thank you so
That's
much,
awesome. I
everybody. We're
appreciate
going to
it.
absolutely, and we'll close out after that. But so everyone have a wonderful night, and God bless. Listen close. Rub my belly. Rub my belly.